Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with the next part of chapter 4. In this case, part 4, associated with the book The World's Greatest Ghost by Roger Bohr. This one, once again, having to do with the themes associated with ghosts of the deep. In other words, ghosts found within various bodies of water. We've seen multiple examples of this already, some really good examples too. This one will pretty much wrap up this chapter here. And then we'll go ahead and we'll start the next chapter in the next part altogether. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are with regards to this. So far, some pretty memorable stuff when it comes to some of these ghosts and how they basically harbor certain bodies of water and stay there. And then we've seen other examples of ghosts following people as well, at least towards other locations too. This first segment has a very interesting title. It's called Help Me in the Name of God. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. And then once again, I'll give my thoughts and opinions at the end of this chapter, at the end of this part later on. So this is what it says. A woman's ghostly cries for help are the only clues to the disappearance of a Mississippi riverboat that vanished 106 years ago. The strange voice was first reported on the evening of May 28, 1875. Picnicking near the riverbank, more than 50 Vicksburg high school students told police they had heard a woman screaming for help somewhere on the river. The police decided it was a prank. They made a thorough search of the waters, but there was no such woman. There has been no such woman in 106 years, though hundreds of different people have reported the same eerie cries. The reports have come from Vicksburg, Natchez, St. Joseph, and other points along the Mississippi. In most documented cases, the chilling screams are followed by the words in French, "Help me in the name of God, the men are hurting me." No one can explain the disembodied voice or its message, but there are fishermen and residents of the riverbank communities who believe it is linked to a darker mystery that still haunts the Father of Waters. On a clear blue day in June 1874, the riverboat Iron Mountain set out from Vicksburg for New Orleans, carrying 57 passengers and towing a string of barges. The big paddle wheel steamer was famous in her time, plying the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to every port between New Orleans and Pittsburgh. But on this voyage, she was sailing into history, for after rounding a bend into the river, she vanished. Not long after her departure, the string of barges was found bobbing in the water. The tow ropes had been slashed in two, something that would be done only in an emergency, but no emergency had been reported, and rescue craft converging on the scene could find no evidence of one. Hundreds of miles of river bottom were dragged, but the waters yielded no trace of wreckage or bodies. Of the many explanations advanced at the time, one has been reappeared throughout the years. In that troubled period after the Civil War, riverboat pirates still operated on some parts of the Mississippi, and there was tempting cargo of wealth and beauty aboard the Iron Mountain. On the passenger list were several Creole women who spoke French. Could the big steamboat have been sacked by pirates who dismantled her and concealed the sections after a ghastly carnival of rape and murder? And then that's it. And then the next segment is called Voyage of the Frozen Dead. The Yankee whaling ship Herald was cruising off the west coast of Greenland inside the Arctic Circle. From the bridge, Captain Warren peered ahead at a three-masted schooner drifting through the ice floes like a ghost ship. Warren took 8 men in a longboat and then rowed to the silent vessel. Through the encrusted ice, they could make out the schooner's name, Octavius. Warren and 4 of the sailors boarded the schooner. They crossed the silent, moss-covered decks, opened the hatch, and then descended to the crew's quarters. There they found the bodies of 28 men, all lying on their bunks and then wrapped in heavy blankets. They fumbled their way aft to the captain's cabin, where the nightmare continued. The master of the Octavius slumped over a ship's log, the pen close to his right hand, as if he had dozed off at work. On a bed against one wall of the cabin, a blonde woman lay frozen to death under piles of blankets. And in the corner, there was a sailor and a small boys whose bodies told a tragic story. The sailor sat with his flint and steel clutched in frozen hands. In front of him was a tiny heap of shavings, silent evidence of a fire that had failed to ignite. The little boy crouched close to him, his face buried in the seaman's jacket as if he had huddled there in a pathetic search for warmth. The men from the Herald clambered back onto the deck, taking with them the schooner's logbook as proof of what they had found. Back aboard the whaler, they could only watch helplessly while the derelict schooner drifted away from them among the icebergs, never ever to be seen again. It was well they had taken the logbook. The world would not be ready to accept the story, which remains one of the strangest tales of the sea. The last log entry was dated November 11, 1762. The dying captain wrote that the Octavius had been frozen in for 17 days. The fire had gone out and they could not restart it. The location of the ship at the time, said the captain, was longitude 160 west, latitude 75 north. Captain Warren looked at the charts in disbelief. In those last hours of human life, the ship had been locked in the Arctic Ocean north of Point Barrow, Alaska, thousands of miles from where the whaler had found her. Guided by some unknown force, year after year, the battered schooner had crept steadily eastward through the vast ice fields until she entered the North Atlantic. In doing so, she had then achieved the dream of all mariners. For centuries, men had sought the legendary Northwest Passage, a navigable route along the Arctic Ocean between the Atlantic and the Pacific. On that historic 13-year voyage, the ghost ship Octavius, with a crew of frozen dead, had been the first to find it. And then there's a little mini segment that's called Screams of a Betrayer. Britain's coastline is rich in salty tales of smuggling exploits, and many towns with rocky caves nearby claim they are haunted by the ghosts of contraband runners. One such story is told of Martson Grotto, a series of caverns between South Shields and Sunderland on England's northeastern coast. The gang using the grotto to land their booty were betrayed by one of their colleagues, a man called John the Gibber. Coast guards were waiting when they rowed their loot ashore from a hugger anchored in Madsen Bay. A friend of the smugglers got wind of the plot and then fired a pistol, alerting those aboard the hugger that something had gone wrong. John the Gibber lived to regret his treachery. He was trussed up in a barrel, hoisted to the roof of the cavern, and then left to starve to death. The grotto, now a restaurant, has echoed with his screams for more than 150 years. And the last segment is called The Lonely Lighthouse. On the night the Aileen Moore lighthouse went dark, two sailors on the Brigantine Far Wind saw a strange sight. Cutting diagonally across their bow, a longboat with a huddle of men aboard was bearing toward the lighthouse on the rocky Flannel Islands off the west coast of Scotland. The sailors called, but there was no answer. The boatmen wore foul weather gear, and when moonlight slashed through a rift in the clouds, their faces shone like bone. One of the would-be rescuers testified later, "Our first thought was that they were floating dead from some shipwreck, but then we heard the oarlocks and saw the movement of their arms." Later on that night of December 15th, 1900, a squall broke. Without the Guardian light, ships were in dire peril. There was one angry question from the skippers: why was the lighthouse dark? On the day after Christmas, the supply vessel Hesperus hove to off the islands to investigate. When there was no answer to repeated signal, crewmen set out in a small boat to the landing dock. Tying up, they were chilled by a strange silence. The lighthouse had been staffed by 3 men, but no one was there to welcome the Hesperus. There were no signs of violence, and the ladders were well stocked. Lamps were all trimmed and ready, the beds made, the dishes and kitchen utensils shining. As the searchers climbed through the empty lighthouse, they found only 2 things that struck them as unusual. On the stairway and in a cubbyhole office where the log was kept, there were shreds of a seaweed unknown to them. There were no oilskins or sea boots in the building, which seemed to imply that all 3 men had left the lighthouse together. No lighthouse keeper had ever been known to abandon his post, even in the worst weather, and this was a point repeatedly made during the inquiry which followed, an inquiry which was hushed to silence by the reading of the logbook kept by keeper Thomas Marshall. December 12th, gale north by northwest, sea lashed to fury, never seen such a storm, waves very high, tearing at lighthouse, everything ship-shape, James Duet irritable. And then later that day, Storm still raging, wind steady, storm bound, cannot go out. Ship passing, sounding foghorn, could see lights of cabins. Ducat quiet, Donald MacArthur crying. December 13th, storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet, MacArthur praying. And then later, noon, gray daylight, me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed. Inexplicably, there was no entry for December 14th. The final line in the log read December 15th, 1 p.m. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. No explanation could be offered but that the men had been seeing visions. While the log entries that reported gales lashing the Flannel Isles, there had been none at all 20 miles away on the island of Lewis. Locals pointed to an even more mysterious cause of the disappearance of the lighthouse men. For centuries, the Flannel Isles had been haunted. Hebridean farmers might sail there during daylight to check on their sheep, but few, except for the foolish, at the lighthouse there stayed overnight. Final proof at the local zany was the evidence of the sailors of the fair wind of the longboat crowded with ghosts. And then that's it. That's everything associated with the final part of Chapter 4, Ghosts of the Deep. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. As you can see, some pretty interesting examples, right? Some final examples associated with those tied to ghosts that are linked to waters. In some cases, actually coming from a ship. In other cases, from other parts of the water as well. The first one, with the eerie title, Help Me in the Name of God, apparently ties into a creepy thing. There was a boat that was traveling through that area there in Mississippi called the Iron Mountain, and apparently it was a pretty prominent boat, but on some fateful day it just happened to run into some pirates. That's what I believe happened there as well, when the story was essentially alluding to that. I mean, how would someone know afterward, right? Like, how would someone stop it? Imagine that boat going through that coastline or going through those waters, and then out in the middle of nowhere, all these pirates pop out. There's nobody around for who knows how long, and so those pirates could have done anything and everything, including the utmost horrible thing associated with them. Apparently, with that ship having some list of several Creole women who spoke French, and they in turn would have been able to do anything and everything depraved to those women, and nobody would know, and nobody would find out anything as far as what happened to those bodies and so on. So that could eerily tie into why there's screams of a woman screaming out in French, and it could be linked directly to that situation. Then the other one was another eerie title, Voyage of the Frozen Dead. Apparently there's that ship associated with the interesting name called Octavius. It was found with having 28 bodies, all of them essentially with men. 28 plus bodies, all of them associated with men that were found frozen solid. Somewhere along the way, they must have gotten lost, or something must have happened where they basically stayed way up north in the frigid cold, to the point that those entries were showcasing that they couldn't start anything. No fires of any kind, and then they were left out there by themselves. Can you imagine that? Just day after day, just that situation of just insane cold and having no chance of getting away from it no matter how much you tried, and then basically being locked in because of the ice freezing over the entire ship. So they couldn't get out. There was no escaping the waters there. They were basically stuck at that location, and that poor boy as well, huddling as much as he could with his father, presumably the father, but again, finding no warmth there. And then the ship just eerily going out. Once it was discovered and once the logbook was taken, then the ship somehow dislodged itself, and then it went basically going into a mist of some sort, and then never ever being seen again afterward. No doubt it would have been sunken at some point. And then the last one associated with the Lonely Lighthouse, I've talked about that as well. That one has been on my channel, the Flannel Isles, those lighthouses there. Still to this day, there's very little, if at all, evidence pointing to what happened to those three men. There's indications that they must have been slammed hard by some water, but that water would have been just record level, considering the location of the lighthouse, how tall it was, how high it was above the seawater as well. And yet there was evidence that there was something there that was hitting that lighthouse tremendously, causing these men again to basically freak out over multiple days, and then they were gone. No indication about as to what happened to them, what caused them to run away, where they went to. Their disappearances are as mysterious today as possible, and then the idea that that place was haunted as well, it just adds up to a bunch of mysterious circumstances. But I have talked about that in my channel. It was interesting to see it here again. All right, everyone, let me know what you guys think about this chapter, Ghosts of the Deep. Let me know in the comments below. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.